Listen, rookie, I'm just a man who's good at what he does. Naming snakes.
Naming snakes makes you feel alive, huh? You love taxonomy and don't want it to stop. Is it the same with all great heroes throughout history?
This isn't a training exercise. Our lives are riding on this. If you lose, we're snake food.
Okay, let's go. I know this place better than you. I'll be point man. Follow me.
Okay.
Wow, Snake Man, that was really far.
And so quick, too. Like Australia's national animal, the roadrunner.
The passageway to Wooster's lab is just beyond this spooky room. Oh, my head!
Meryl, what's going into you?
He's in my mind! Ah!
Who is? Does he have a name? Can I name him? I'm gonna call him Jumper. Jumper Sloppy.
Snake Man.
Show yourself!
It is I, Psycho Shano, master of telekinesis and fourth wall breaking. Feel my power.
I know you. You're one of the gang of thieves. I read all about you in the latest issue of Australasian Stealth Science, the premier journal for tactical espionage herpetology.
Yes, I got the cover.
Yeah? Well, get a load of this. What did you... I can't control any of my snakes.
Snake Man, listen to me. You have to unplug the snakes from port 1 and then replug them into port 2.
Colonel, what the hell are you talking about? Port 1, Port 2, the only port I know of is Brisbane, the largest port in Queensland. Queensland, Australia.
Australia is a beautiful country filled with wonderful people.
Yes, it is. And we wouldn't want anyone to think we were making fun of the people themselves.
Damn, you are good at breaking the fourth wall.
Now let me demonstrate my true power. I can read your mind. You're thinking that this bit has gone on too long, aren't you?
It's not really a good way to end this without doing the whole fight, is there? That wouldn't be very funny one to listen to now, would it?
No, I don't think it would be.
Well then.
Well then.
Wooster!
Do, 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 do.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich, the show about the video games that I love, and the ones that I just happen to be playing at the moment. I'm your host, Shano, and today we have with us Cari.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us on this video game podcast.
You're so welcome. I have no choice. I live with you.
Yeah, you also had no choice that we just played through all the Metal Gear Solids, or at least the first couple. Yeah. So, I've mentioned it and sort of teased at it on the show in a variety of ways, but I'm a pretty big fan of the Metal Gear Solid games. You know, I played them as a kid, and, they had a pretty big impact on me. They were like one of those formative pieces of entertainment media that I really liked. I'm sort of like a fanboy of or whatever. And I guess because of the Snake Man stuff, they like
I do think that
percolated back.
implanted it in your brain.
Because it was like right around the time that we did that, I was like, you want to play Metal Gear Solid? This like fucking 25-year-old game. And so then we played through the first 3 in the series. I mean, the first 3 Metal Gear Solids, they're technically 3, 4, and 5 of the Metal Gear series. There's like a really complicated.
earlier ones, right?
Yeah, we tried
Yeah.
playing the very first Metal Gear game, like a port of it, and it was just too exhausting. There's a
We're
certain
not
like
real
you go,
gamers.
yeah, you go enough far back, and it's too punishing to play a video game like that. Yeah, we were playing them, and in the course of playing through them, we were talking a lot about them. They're very like theme heavy games. They're very story heavy games, so there was a lot to sort of chat about, and then we thought, hey, it might be fun to talk about it on the show, because I think that they're, the sort of setting the games themselves aside, they bring up a variety of different interesting thematics, which is, again, I think why they impacted me so much as a kid. And specifically, like anti-war and anti-nuclear messaging is like a very key kind of set of themes that go throughout these games. And so I guess to start off, because I'm assuming if you're listening to this, there's like, some people who are familiar with the games and find them interesting, probably a number of people who maybe necessarily aren't. So in terms of pitching why this might still be interesting to you to listen to, Cari, what were your sort of thoughts about the series, like before we started playing through them? Because obviously you had encountered these games before in one way or another, or you'd heard about them. So what was your like, I don't know, impression of the series before you actually played these games?
I think I mentioned this briefly when we talked about the games on the show very briefly before. Like my main experience with them was many, many, many years ago. I had dated a guy who was like obsessed with these games, and he asked me to play through Metal Gear Solid 3, and I played through some of it without watching any of the cutscenes.
I think that's when you told me that, that's when I was like, okay, we have to play these games.
And so my impression is colored by just me playing through some of the missions, and then like the personality of this guy that I knew, which was he was obsessed with it in the way of like he then wanted to like join the Marines, which is kind of like the opposite of the impact that these games had on you, which I think is really interesting. But like, I really didn't give it much thought apart from it just being like, a straight like war/spy game or whatever. I just, and through cultural osmosis, I knew that there was like more to it. And then obviously just from knowing you and you talking about it, but I didn't really think that it would be the way that it was. And I especially didn't expect the way Metal Gear Solid 2 was, like at all.
Yeah, that's the really weird one.
That's my favorite one, I think.
yeah, that's the one too that now in retrospect, like, is viewed very differently, and we'll get into that when we start talking about them. And so for this episode, we've fully played through the first 3 games, so we'll kind of go into talking about each of those. Not too much like story wise, because that would be its own like 7-hour.
Nobody wants that.
I mean, I want to do it, but no, I'm sure nobody wants to listen to it. Because these get the sort of canonical chronology of the series is so complex and absurd and ridiculous with all these like twists and turns. I'm gonna be honest,
it's very confusing to me even as we were like playing through it. I'm like, what year is it right now? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, there was a lot of pausing and you asking me and me like saying what I remembered off the top of my head, or looking up like the Metal Gear wiki and being like, oh yeah, this is when this is supposed to have happened. And that's more just like fun if you're actually playing through the games. But I think, again, we'll talk through each of the Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, sort of talk about the gameplay a little bit, but mostly like the thematic stuff. And to set it up, I wanted to talk about this idea that I encountered called the military entertainment complex. And I think this is an interesting way to frame thinking through these games and sort of war and military games more generally, especially in regards to what you were just describing, Cari, this sort of like impression you got of them, or, meeting somebody who was playing them, but sort of their takeaway from it, why they were interested in it was like, oh, this is like a cool, fun action game.
Right.
Because that's also certainly how they were like marketed and how they continue to be marketed, right? And the whole kind of like play of them is then when you actually go through and you engage with the story, they try to do all these little subversive techniques that push back against it, which is something ultimately we can kind of argue or at least debate whether or not that's like an effective strategy. But, even the first time like I encountered these games when I was little kid, I was like at a friend's house because I played these games as they came out.
Right.
pretty much. So I was like 9, 11, and
It's so
14.
crazy to think about you playing this at like age 11.
Well, I mean, you could see how some of that stuff permeated in.
For sure.
But the very first game, I was like at a friend's house, and I think it was during the helicopter fight, and he was like playing through the game then, and I saw that, and my impression of it was just like, oh, this looks like a really fun military action game. Like, I want to play this. And so then, I got my like mom or whatever to buy it for me, and then I was like, whoa, this is not what I expected at all. But yeah, so this idea, the military entertainment complex, I think it was coined by this guy named Tim Lunar in 2000. And to sort of give you an impression of what the idea is, there's a quote from an article by him and this other guy, Henry Lowood, from 2002 called Theater of War, that I want to read. Quote, as the military's new blockbuster video games illustrate, the military-industrial complex, contrary to initial expectations, did not fade away with the end of the Cold War. It has simply reorganized itself. In fact, it is far more efficiently organized than ever before. Indeed, a cynic might argue that whereas the military-industrial complex was more or less visible and identifiable during the Cold War, today it is invisibly everywhere, permeating our daily lives. The military-industrial complex has become the military entertainment complex. The entertainment industry is both a major source of innovative ideas and technology, and the training ground for what might be called post-human warfare. End quote.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so the idea here, this is sort of like a theoretical proposition, and there have been other people who have kind of looked at this sort of similar phenomenon, given it other names. I just happen to find this one and like it. I believe this guy also just more recently wrote like a book kind of really expanding about it that came out in 2018. That's just called like the military entertainment complex. But this is kind of speaking to that idea that you see crop up a lot in sort of left-wing critiques of culture, especially like mainstream Hollywood film stuff, where it's like, you look at like the Marvel movies or whatever, and there are all these like ties and sort of consultancies and okays they get from like the Pentagon, right?
Yeah.
In terms of about like what they can include in their movies and these sort of like weird cross hybrid things, which then makes, the valid argument that you can look at these as essentially military propaganda films, right? They're trying to promote a certain idea of American exceptionalism and a sort of technological viewpoint of war. And this has also been the case with video games, especially the really big blockbuster war games. So you have like the Call of Duty series, right? Which is like this huge pillar of entertainment in its own right. And it has all these like license agreements with the military. Again, they have like consultants and stuff. And there's a lot has been written about those being essentially kind of military propaganda.
I think it's interesting too to think about like the reciprocal relationship there, right? And this is like more related to Metal Gear Solid 2 specifically, but there was something I read where they were talking about this and then how like games and VR are used to prepare soldiers, like simulations and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the video games that they're talking about in one of the piece that Theater of War piece is really talking about the, like, at a certain point in the 2000s, the American military was actually like making video games. They weren't just sort of like leaning in and sort of giving suggestions or giving frameworks to what were coming out from other studios. They were producing their own video games. And at some point in the 2000s, there was one, America's Army was like a very famous one that they came out with.
Was
and
that developed by the military?
Yes, it was developed.
God.
Incredibly, at least with incredibly close cooperation. And it was essentially, these things were designed, like, whereas you can argue something like Call of Duty or again, like Marvel or any big, like, military movie sort of has like a soft, propaganda element of like, it's just trying to make you think the military is good.
Yeah.
The military was making games and other materials that were intended for direct recruitment purposes, right? Like the idea was that you would play those games as a sort of step one in sort of signing up and enlisting in the military.
That's so sick.
And a lot of military recruitment ads, certainly when I was, a kid up until now, basically throughout the whole period of the War on Terror, up till this day, have often like now they take on this element of like, it would be so cool to join the military. It'd be just like playing a video game, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how.
I mean, they even have like the esports people now on Twitch and stuff, right? Like they have their own streamers and shit.
Exactly.
It's really insane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even weirder too. And I'm sure, people who are listening might have similar like experiences, but a lot of my friends who actually did end up going into the military and like, serving in one of the various branches of the war on terror and came back, like often would describe like, their experiences in the context of video games. Because that was like a shared thing that like all of us as like young men had these like military game experiences. And I had one friend who told me that he spent most of his time in Iraq because he was like a plumber on a base. He spent most of his time in Iraq like playing Call of Duty 3.
That's so weird.
Which is like another weird thing. So anyway, this is just like a sort of a theoretical way to think through the relationship between the actual military apparatus and its goals, and then this like entertainment wing of it. And one of the reasons I wanted to set this up is there's this other article that I initially read like years ago. But I found back again for the context of going through this, and this is by this guy, Nick Robinson. This is an article from 2012 called Video Games, Persuasion, and the War on Terror, Escaping or Embedding the Military Entertainment Complex. And I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but the sort of it's a continual argument of like looking at, hey, let's look at how video games, because a lot happened in gaming and in warfare between, the initial kind of beginnings of this theoretical framework and then, 10 years later. And so he sort of like updates it and looks through it. And one of the points that he's going through is like looking at it as how effective are these things as making their persuasive case about the military. And in doing so, he also talks about resistance, like people using the same games or the same medium of games to like push back against this message. And most of that he focuses on sort of like either indie games that came out that had an anti-war message, or like mods, like popular mods that people had introduced to like kind of stage these anti-war demonstrations or messages like within like certain gaming communities. And the reason why I brought it up is he basically says like that's where most of the industry in terms of like the big budget stuff, the very popular mainstream games that are coming out that have military themes are essentially pro-military. The only place you can find the anti-war stuff is in these sort of like indie places. A few exceptions to this would be something like the Metal Gear Solids franchise, which is like a big AAA, title release. It's very popular, sold millions of copies, but does have an anti-war message throughout. And to that, I also want to pull from this piece. Let me just get it up here. There was a book that came out in 2019 called Japanese Culture Through Video Games by Raquel Hutchinson. And in it, she has a chapter on the Metal Gear games called Hiroshima and Violence in Metal Gear Solid. And she uses that to walk through and sort of make a similar case with some critical points as well, that like this video game series sort of, at least on a content level and in certain ways a gameplay level, is using the framework of a military action adventure game to essentially tell an anti-war and anti-nuclear message. And I don't want to read too much from it, but there is a quote from Hideo Kojima, who is the guy, I guess we should say now, who's the sort of the director of the game series. He's credited as sometimes, I think, a little too much as like the auteur, who sort of came up with this series on his own, which for me is always a complicated notion, because as much as I enjoy the games, and you can see there are these very like personal imprints on it, video games, like any other kind of big industrial cultural product, they're the result of a lot of people. Of course. And often, the auteur thing kind of like hides the labor of those other people, which I think is sort of unfair. But nonetheless, it's clear, like, he had a very specific vision of what these games were going to be. And so this interview quote from him that's in this chapter I want to read says, quote, "Anti-war and anti-nuclear weapons were the consistent messages through the series. My parents' generation was born during World War II. My generation grew up listening to their first-hand accounts of war, and we also learned of the wretchedness and absurdity of war and nuclear weapons from the movies and books around us. Video games are a natural fit for fighting and competition, but even so, I felt that they should be able to promote an anti-war, anti-nuclear weapons message, and more so that it was necessary. Quote. And, you know, I think here, and what the rest of this chapter does, what I think is interesting, is, you know, it talks about, you know, this is a series that comes out of Japan. It's made by a Japanese company, Konami, and we might talk in more depth about them later on, because there's some interesting and weird stuff to be there. But, you know, I think one of the reasons why this message was sort of able to be portrayed in the way it was, and maybe one of the reasons why it really affected me as a young kid playing these games, and it wasn't something that I was able to really piece together later on, is that these are games that do take, you know, they're set primarily in the framework of, like, the United States. Most of the characters are American, and they involve, like, the American military, American conspiracies, America's perceived enemies, domestic and abroad and everything. But they're written from a Japanese perspective, right? They're written from an outsider perspective. And I think that's one of the ways in which, in such this, like, big blockbuster thing, there was able to be a kind of more critical view on the military, and specifically, of course, with the nuclear stuff, right? Like that being a very particular set of experiences and sort of cultural impact that it had in Japan, and being able to see, like, the American military through that lens, I think is pretty interesting. I should also make it clear that I think a lot of this is worth talking about, and I do want to get into the specifics of the game now. But as we do, like, another reason why I really like the games is that they're very, like, stupid. Like, for all of this, like, intense depth that is, like, attempted to speak at, you know, they're very, very goofy in a lot of ways, and I. Obviously, that's, like, a sensibility that I really connect to and love.
Yeah.
Like, I love when things are over the top and goofy and ridiculous.
And I think that that's what makes them work, right? Like, they have all those moments of, like, levity and goofiness where if they didn't have that, then some parts might be, like, almost insufferable. Because the writing can be, like, a little ham-fisted in parts, right? But you have to take it... Yeah, I'm sure it'd be nice. But it's like, you know, it's campy and it's just fun to play through. And there is a point of absurdity that it reaches when some stuff is repeated so much where I just looked at you like, what's going on?
Yeah. And again, since we're going to start talking about the games now, what we're talking about here are the first 3 of the Metal Gear Solids. And then there's, like, another 3 that I'm trying to get you to retain interest and play through with me.
I'm
and
enjoying Peace Walker.
Yeah, but as you go through them, you can see, like, in my opinion, and I think it is generally an opinion of consensus, I do think certain, like, the writing goes downhill.
There's, like, a real breakdown.
There already is a shaky, like, a foundation for which that is to be based upon. So, okay, let's talk about the games themselves. And first, what I'll just say is, in terms of, like, actual, like, gameplay and story mechanics, the first 3 all have, like, these same tropes, right? So they're stealth games, and you play as the protagonist of the game is a sneaking character, right? You're a sneaking secret agent, and
named Snake.
Well, in most of them, bum bum bum. And so you're tasked. You have, like, a top secret mission to go infiltrate some kind of terrorist or rogue military base installation thing. And you go in, and along the way, you uncover this vast conspiracy that involves betrayal of your superiors, lots of weird supernatural elements that just show up out of nowhere, and ultimately there's a climax involving a giant robot that fires nuclear missiles, which you have to fight and destroy.
I do think it's worth mentioning just because I think it's really funny that, like, the main character is just completely ripped off from Escape from New York. Like, the appearance,
yes, yeah,
the attitude, like, everything.
And I think here's a good point to bring up too, that with all of these sort of thematic things that we've been setting up this conversation with, in terms of the actual writing itself and the characters and the plot devices and stuff that come up, they really are an amalgamation of a lot of like film ideas, right?
For sure,
each game definitely takes its like ideas from just a whole smattering of movies. To varying degrees of self-awareness. Yeah, so the main guy, Snake, is a sort of combination of a bunch of like 80s, 90s action heroes, the most direct one being Snake Plissken from Escape from New York, almost like down to the exact like look, the way that the voice is.
And I didn't bring that up to disparage it. I honestly think it's like really cool.
No, it's awesome.
It rocks.
it's really cool. But yeah, I mean, and so that's certainly in a lot of other criticisms and stuff that I've read of like Kojima's writing.
Sure.
Is that like it relies more heavily on these sort of film tropes and like actual military stuff, and that kind of gets into, it's like a meta representation thing, right? It's not even like a direct representation of war; it's like a representation of representations of war. But nonetheless, it uses that to then try to sneak in this like possibly subversive stuff. So let's talk about Metal Gear Solid, the first one. So this game came out 1998 for the PlayStation. I played it again when I was like 8 or 9. You just played it for the first time.
I did, and it holds up.
A month ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what did you think about it? Just what was your impression?
This is not related to like the conversation we're having, but I was impressed with like how atmospheric it was and how it did so much with like the graphics that it had being from like 1998, and it really just made me kind of be like, games suck now, which is probably just because I'm old.
Right, yeah.
But it was really fun to play through, and it was really weird. Like, even though it does get weirder as it goes on, like even the first game is just like really weird, and those nuclear politics are there, and I had a lot of fun playing through it and like talking about that with you.
It definitely is very atmospheric. It's kind of spooky and verges on like horror at certain
for sure
moments of it.
I mean, like my favorite fight is that Psycho Mantis fight, and that really does feel like you're like in like a weird like psychological horror movie or something, the way that it plays out.
That's probably one of the more if you've only sort of played through the games once, or if you've just heard about them through cultural osmosis, that's one of the big ones, the Psycho Mantis fight, because that also introduced a thing that was ended up being pretty consistent in a lot of the games, but it's most dramatically done there is like the sort of meta awareness that you're playing a video game.
Sure, yeah.
Because that's the fight where you play like this against this like, I don't know, psychic madman wearing a gas mask who's like floating around, and
is he undead? I feel like there's like some.
It's so unclear. I mean, a lot of this gets retconned later on in a really stupid way. In the fourth game, pretty much everything that you haven't played through yet, so spoiler alert, but pretty much all supernatural things get retconned as like being nanomachines. But at the time when it was made, it's not really explained, but yeah, he has just like psychic powers, and so when you're playing the fight, he tells you to like, you put your controller down on the ground and he vibrates it. And, he says, I can move the controller with my mind. He can read your memory card.
That's so cool. Like what a little touch.
and you can't really control yourself during that sequence. So then you have to unplug the controller from one port and plug it into the other one in order to beat the game. And I think there's something interesting there, and again, another thematic that plays into the anti-war stuff, or at least certainly the sort of criticism or awareness. There's an attempt to make the player aware that you're playing a video game, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not actually the hero here. You're engaging with a medium.
Right. And that happens much more dramatically in the next game, which we'll talk about, but it starts here.
So in terms of like writing and story, the other thing that this series is known for is like the super long cutscenes, which is definitely, you didn't mention it now, but that was like the thing, when you were talking about not playing through the cutscenes in the third game, and when I was trying to like convince you that this would be fun to play, you were sort of like, aren't the cutscenes going to be really long?
Yeah, I am just the kind of person that has a very low tolerance for having to sit for an hour while I'm playing a video. Like, I like building the little beaver city and watching it grow and interacting with it. That's the type of gamer I am. But it works because it does really feel in a lot of parts like it's an action movie that you get to interact with. That is what it feels like.
So what did you think of the story of the first game? What did you think of all the twists?
It was good. It was confusing in some parts. There was definitely stuff, even in this first game, that I had to like pause it and be like, what's going on? And even like, maybe this is just like me because my brain is so scrambled, but like even in like preparing for this and like reading stuff, I had to be like, is that from the first game or is that from the second game? Is stuff canon or is it not canon? But I mean, it's an interestingly structured game with a lot of like twists and turns that can be at times bewildering, but it really keeps things interesting. Is the best way that I can put it.
You're being so diplomatic. You don't
I really
have
like
to.
the series. I don't want to make it seem like I don't like it because I do.
Okay.
But it does. There are parts where it's just like, oh, they just decided to do this and they just like did it without.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that's something that's very present in this game, but also in the other ones too, where it does feel like everything but the kitchen sink is thrown in. Just like every fucking idea, every trope, like it doesn't really feel like any plot point that should have been is cut out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it might have been. Was it during Metal Gear Solid 2? Metal Gear Solid 2 has a vampire in it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the one where I was just like, this is kind of like, it's very anime, and it's also like if you let like 9-year-old me make something, I'd be like, and then there was a vampire. And I would be like so excited about it, and I would just keep adding more and more stuff to it. And then there's like a really fat guy on roller skates.
Right, yeah.
Which is, I think, what makes it so fun for me, because I am like, I'm an anime fan. And the whole series is like very anime.
Yeah, for sure. And as somebody who was not super into anime as a kid, nor as an adult,
ever.
No offense, no offense to the anime fans out there. This was probably one of my only real exposures to that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until later on when I was like, would talk to friends who were into that kind of stuff. I'd be like, oh, that's where all that shit comes from. That's why there's just like magical people who have like spirit weapons and stuff in the middle of the game, or even like the idea of like the big robot mechs and stuff. And
also just like all the twists. Like there's so many just like top 10 anime betrayal moments throughout the series.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, in the first game, you're playing as Solid Snake, and you're supposed to go into the Shadow Moses Island, which is controlled by your former unit, which is Foxhound, and each of those guys is like a sort of magical anime villain. And the main one being led by Liquid Snake. Which is like the inversion of Solid Snake. And
it's just really good.
It is really stupid.
It rocks.
And the big plot twist, could you see it coming? Is that he's your clone, or you're both clones of Big Boss. Right, the guy that you killed in the other Metal Gear games that came out before this. But and speaking of anime, and I remember one fun moment I had playing with you, and this one is there's a character of Otacon, which is again sort of maybe if you haven't played the games, you're sort of familiar through cultural osmosis. He's like the nerdy scientist sidekick character. He helps you in this game, but also in other ones. But you rescue him. Yeah. In Metal Gear Solid, and his real name is Hal. Yeah. But he tells you, his name is Otacon, and it's short for Otaku Convention. Yeah. And I remember you put down the controller at that point, and you were like, "Oh, come on! Is that where that came from.
I almost felt like it should have been obvious to me that that's where it came from when that came up. But it is just like a funny choice, and I think we can talk about it when we talk about the next game. Like there is a lot of commentary about otaku culture in these games.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I think there's been some speculation and stuff written about like that character being Kojima's self-insert character.
Oh, really?
The guy who's like maybe a little bit kind of too nerdy to actually be involved in the heroic action stuff, but he's sort of the sidekick. And his character is interesting too because this is at least in terms of like direct plot stuff. In terms of the thematics from from the beginning that we were talking about of like the anti-nuclear stuff in particular, the whole point is that Otacon is a scientist who's been working on the Metal Gear Rex thing, which is a nuclear weapon, and he reveals that his whole like family history, like his grandfather worked on the Manhattan Project,
right,
and then his dad was born on August 6th, 1945, which was the day of the Hiroshima attack.
He's definitely one of my favorite characters because what they do with his like backstory just becomes so like off the rails.
Yeah, and again, all of it gets like retconned later on and stuff too. But it is ham-fisted. But the idea is he's supposed to be a representative of the kind of the idea of like a scientist who just wants to work on things for the betterment of mankind, but ends up working on horrible weapons technology and specifically nuclear weapons, and his whole family history is like linked to that.
Right.
And it's a trope that also comes from like sort of sci-fi stuff a lot, where like scientists are sort of framed as being I don't know, almost like victims of the military industrial complex, right? They're sort of like forced into like taking their dreams and their projects of the betterment of mankind and turning them into these horrible weapons.
Kind of like unwittingly doing evil, which is like
yeah, I don't know how much I buy that in general. I mean, certainly it works as like a narrative trope or whatever.
For sure.
But, I think there's more open question in terms of like culpability, because there's like the whole like first interaction that they have is like Otacon doesn't like realize that Metal Gear Rex is like a nuclear weapons platform. When it's like so fucking obvious that it is.
It's obvious like, that's to us.
I guess so. Yeah, it's it's a fun little character stuff that touches on that thematic. He also has one of the most like memed moments from that game, which is the like can love bloom on a battlefield?
Oh yeah.
Question, which is again also very like ham-fisted and cheesy kind of dialogue.
For sure, yeah. I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the most important things in the game, which is Snake's 50 huskies.
Oh yeah, you were obsessed with the huskies.
I wanted so badly to know the whole game. I was like, are they bringing the dogs back? Like, what happens to the dogs? I think that's such like a weird touch. And then I think you told me, and I also like read about it later, that it comes back in a later game as well. There's like something with the dogs, right?
Sort of. I mean, there's like a lot of the thing here, and as the games keep building on themselves, right? Like any kind of weird canon, it eventually just like kind of keeps mutating and growing and circling around its own ideas. And one of the things that really comes up in this game is like all the animal stuff. Like all the bad guys have like it's some qualifier and then an animal name,
right? Like Revolver Ocelot,
Revolver Ocelot, Vulcan Raven, Sniper Wolf, and then that they try to like make that into like more meaningful than it is, and it gets weirder and more complicated as the games go on. But yeah, the dogs thing is like another thing that is brought up a lot. Is like Snake keeps referring to himself as like, I'm a dog of war, meaning like a mercenary, and that is a theme that goes through a lot of the other games. I think like in terms of again thinking through like critiques of the military industrial complex or the military entertainment complex, the other sort of spooky science thing that is very present in this game is the gene manipulation, gene therapy
Yeah.
stuff. And the kind of like silly element of it is that the big reveal in this game is that Solid Snake is a clone of Big Boss, and so is Liquid Snake.
Spoiler alert.
And also all the soldiers that you've been fighting are genome soldiers.
Right.
And there's a specific use. This game also was the first, certainly in this series, and it may have been one of the first games ever to do this. In the cutscenes, it's not just like animations of the characters talking. It like they go on these like long monologues explaining all of the like military lore shit that's happening in the game, and then it'll cut to actual kind of documentary style footage of weapons tests and like when Otacon brings up the Hiroshima bomb, it like cuts to like nuclear bombs footage, explosions and stuff going off. And so there's a long thing talking about the gene therapy stuff towards the end where the whole like conspiratorial backstory is that like all the Gulf War syndrome soldiers, which in reality was related to the use of like depleted uranium shells, right? Like all these guys came back sick from that, but in the game world, it's like they were actually all being genetically experimented on they were putting in like genome sequences from Big Boss into all the soldiers to try to make them better soldiers. It's a little like, what? Like the science doesn't really make sense, but...
And then a bunch of the characters in the game have like the Fox Die virus, right? Which is like a programmed virus based on their genetics to like kill them by inducing a heart attack or whatever at some predetermined point. It's actually unclear if it's a predetermined point or not. To me.
Again, that a lot of stuff, that sort of only comes up when it's like necessary for the plot to advance. It doesn't really like make full sense, but you can see again, it's swinging for the fences with these kind of big ideas that don't really hold up, but it's attempting to try to say something about the fears of like biomedical experiments and engineering being used in a military context, to create super soldiers or whatever.
And I think if you take out like the silliness of it, which is like a guy just randomly like screaming and having a heart attack or whatever, it speaks to like the expendability of soldiers, right? Because they're obviously putting in all this effort to create these like perfect like genome soldiers or whatever, and then they also have put in all this effort to just like get rid of them. Like it's like nothing to them to get rid of these guys, right?
Yeah, they're expendable, and that's another theme that comes up a lot. And I think also at the very end of the game, when there's like the big info dump from Liquid Snake, who's like telling you the whole plot of the game again. The way that starts is like, at this point, there's been the sort of reveal that your superiors have been lying to you about why they sent you in and what your mission was. And Liquid Snake, the main antagonist, turns to Solid Snake, the guy you're playing as, and he's like, once you realized that, you were being betrayed, you kept on playing anyway. Like,
right.
You and it's sort of a meta thing to the player. It's like, why did you keep playing? It's because you enjoy killing. And I think,
is it this part as well that he's like, you've been killing our brothers?
Yes. Yeah. But, again, this is like a question of how effective this is in terms of communicating this message, but it's at least introducing the idea that, that what you've been doing in the game is not a morally good thing.
Right.
Which was unique, insofar as my experience with playing games, was definitely unique at the time, right? Yeah. This idea that like, you thought this was just like a fun action game, you're actually doing horrific murders.
Right. And it's touching on this idea of like that we talk about a lot when we watch war movies or just talk about the world wars, which we do a lot. It's touching on the idea of like like you have more in common with these people that you've been just like ruthlessly killing than you do with the people that put you in this situation, which I think is like a really interesting thematic thing to do. And I'm not sure if like it's like super effective in terms of like everybody would pick up on it. Like I honestly did not just have that thought until we were just talking about it literally just now, but I do think it's really poignant and important.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to insert that in a video game. Essentially, again at the climax, and it's more understated here. It gets more overstated in the later games, to varying degrees of success. But again, it's the introduction of like a sort of subversion against the very thing that you're engaging with,
right,
which is the game, which at least has the potential to be thought provoking. And of course the like the next subsequent thing you have to do is then shirtless karate fight your evil clone.
Like the worst boss fight.
We should bring this up too, because like obviously with a lot of these games, to go back and play them now, right? They're old. They have antiquated control systems. They've got like weird bloated menu interfaces, and some of it can be forgiven. This game, playing through it, when we started up, you were like, "Oh, what?" No, I think I asked you, "What difficulty do you want to play it on? You want to play it on easy?" And you were like, "No, I want to play it on normal. I want to play it the real way." And then halfway through, you were like, "Why the fuck did we pick normal? It's so hard to fucking play this game.
It's really fucking hard, dude."
The last boss fight, which is like, first you have to fight the Metal Gear. Liquid is piloting the Metal Gear. Then afterwards, once you finally defeat that, then you're on top of it. Then you get the big, villain info dump thing. Then you have to karate fight him. And we spent like, I want to say like 3 hours doing both of those.
Yeah.
And we played through that last like Liquid fight easily 100 times.
Yeah.
It got to the point where like me and you were fighting. Like we were getting like angry about fucking fighting the game, because we were going back and forth like trying to do it. And but it, oh man, the satisfaction when
we did it, it was so good. It was so satisfying. It hits different if you spent like 2 hours screaming at your television to do it.
Which is also, I mean, this has very little to do with any of the interesting thematic stuff of the game.
Yeah.
It is something interesting now where a lot of especially like the bigger big release games now, like they're just so easy in comparison, because nobody wants to buy understandably nobody wants to buy a fucking entertainment product that is like impossible to engage with.
Sure, we have less time to do that now, right? Like definitely when you're like 12, you get a different kind of enjoyment out of repeating stuff over and over that maybe you don't get when you have like 2 jobs.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's it for Metal Gear Solid. Shall we talk about the sequel?
Sure. My favorite one.
Yeah, okay. So Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, came out in 2001. It starts off as like a direct sequel, right, where you're following now Solid Snake after the previous game, and now he's kind of his own rogue agent, and him and Otacon have formed a NGO, like a terrorist NGO to like go around the world and like blow up Metal Gears.
It's a good plan.
But then everything goes haywire and the game restarts, and you're not playing as Solid Snake, you're playing as this other character named Raiden.
Now you're like an anime guy who's essentially trapped in a nightmare, who's being gaslit by every single person that he interacts with. Like one of the first things is like, we've replaced your blood with nano machine. This guy is just literally in fucking hell.
Yeah. So, again, when, being a big fan when I was a little kid of the first game, when I got the second game, I was so excited to continue playing as Snake. I was so fucking angry when I realized that you don't really play as Snake for 90% of the game, and you play as this character Raiden. And I was so bitter about it. But then, in retrospect, over years, I understand there's a thematic thing being done. But why don't I just kind of throw it to you, since this is your first time playing with it? How did you feel about that twist and in general playing it?
Mean, I thought it was really interesting and I had a lot of fun with it, but then reading about it, and there was like one of the pieces that you shared talks about how a lot of people viewed it as purposely deceptive, because it kind of was, because like in all the ads, like they didn't show Raiden, who is like a totally different looking character, has like a totally different affect. It was just all the advertising and promotional stuff was based around Snake. So I guess like people like you and then maybe like older people were just like really pissed off, and it was meant to be this like commentary on otaku culture or whatever, but people didn't take it like that. But to me it was like really like funny. I don't know. Like I was obviously surprised as we were playing. There was like, what's going on? Like I also missed Snake, you know, and then like Snake does show up and there's like the weird thing, and I was just like, what's going on? And then of course there's like all the twists around that. But well,
I mean, thematically, I think, you know, this game, you know, the whole thing with genes in the previous game ends up in a sort of ham-fisted way being about like fate, right? Like it's like, oh, if you're a clone, if you have the genetic material from this like legendary super soldier, are you destined to go through that? Are you destined to like killing all this stuff? And this game takes that idea and then applies it to like memes, right? But in the more kind of traditional original iteration of that idea, right? Like the idea of you know, information being these discrete units, information and experience kind of being broken down, and it's more about like it does get into like the internet stuff too, which we can talk about, but it's about, you know, on an interpersonal level, like not so much like genetics being your destiny, but like your upbringing, right? Your training.
Yeah. And I think it is really interesting. Like you just mentioned the internet stuff. It is a lot about like information control, right? Which is really political. And it talks a lot about like manipulating the context around information, right? Which I thought was one of the more interesting parts. Again, this is like my favorite game, and it's because it has all these like weird little things that just like, you know, tickle my particular sensibilities about certain things. And it is just really interesting because it doesn't just like touch on this stuff. It takes you out of the game and makes you think about it like as a person. You're not just interacting with this stuff as a video game. When we were talking about it earlier, I said this game feels like anti-immersive in the sense of like it takes you out of the game just like constantly. The game is constantly like making you think about what it means that you're playing a video game about this. Which I think is great.
Whole third act of this game, like the you know, in the same way that in all of the games there's like the big conspiracy reveal that your superiors are not you know, who you thought they were, and they're like working against your interests, or they sent you in to do a mission for a different reason or whatever. The version of that in this game is that it turns out that the like base thing that you've been infiltrating is like a massive AI system, and that all of the people you've been talking to over radio are like part of this AI system. And you upload a virus into it, and they start breaking down, and you get all these like ridiculous phone calls from them where they're just like blurting out nonsense. The actual game environment starts becoming like big chunks of code start falling down. Like it really is like the most famous or memorable one for me is like when the colonel, who's like your superior officer, keeps interrupting your gameplay to tell you to turn the game off.
Yeah, when that started happening, I was like, what's going on?
Yeah. Which is, again, that fourth wall immersion breaking kind of stuff, right? It's like, turn off the PlayStation right now. You've been playing the game too long.
Right.
The one that was like really upsetting to me as a kid, there's like one line where he's like, don't you have anything better to do with your time than playing this video game? And it made me feel so shitty. It's like an 11-year-old playing it. But of course, it is an interesting idea.
And there is like this like layered commentary about like VR and playing games, where like Raiden is having that conversation with Snake about like all his training, and you realize that all of Raiden's training up until this point has all been VR, right? Like it's all been simulated. But Raiden is like, oh, but it's so good. It's like the same as if I had been in like war scenarios, just like you. Like, don't worry about it or whatever. Right. Which I think is a really interesting aspect as well. And I don't know if by the end of the game, Raiden feels differently when he realizes that everything around him, which he thinks is real, is actually fake. Does he still think that simulation is the same as real life?
Yeah, the ending too is extremely ambiguous, and it really is just like what the fuck happened. There's no point in sort of canonically breaking it down. Snake even says at the end, like, don't worry about it. Like, don't bother trying to figure out what the fuck just happened. It's fine.
And there is like the cool moment at the end with like the dog tags or whatever, where you see like the name that you gave him on his dog tags, and Snake is like, do you know who that is? And he's like, never heard of him. And it's like, oh shit. Yeah, and I think I named them. Did I name him Sneck?
Yeah. You named in all of them. You named them Snick. But yeah, there's that idea of like the making you aware of playing a video game, but specifically in the context of the military action game, it's speaking to the idea that like video games are being used to train soldiers.
Yeah.
And that's outside of the game world itself, that's kind of, again, one of the clunkier things in the midst of, because there's just so much fucking going on towards the end there. But like, there's a point where Raiden reveals part of his backstory was that he was a child soldier and he went through what's called image training, where they would like show him and the other kids in his unit like Hollywood macho man action movies. And it is trying to do that, again, that self-aware commentary on like the very medium of which you're playing through is like a problematic and bad one. The kind of game you're playing right now as a young kid or later as an adult, right, is the thing that's being used to like make soldiers want to kill other people. Yeah. Which, again, I think is certainly somewhat subversive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although this game is definitely the again, that third act is at least out of these first three is the most where it's like a fucking massive info dump. It's like you put down the controller for like an hour and they just explain at long, all the various characters tell you in very long written sequences about the kind of what the theme of the game is or whatever.
And this one gets also just like really, really, really silly, which I appreciate. It has my favorite boss battle in this one is Fat Man, which, like we were talking about earlier, is like named after like a nuclear weapon, but he literally is
the one that was used on Nagasaki,
right? But he really is just like a huge fat guy on roller skates with a glass of wine that has a straw in it, and he's just like it's very anime. Yeah. And he has like all these lines like, I'm the greatest that humanity has to offer and the lowest, which you could like apply that to like, the bomb, right? Like, this is like the pinnacle of human achievement, and it's also like a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those examples, especially as it goes on, where the names become less subtle, or like, it's like the Lucas like General Grievous kind of naming thing, where it's just like, I mean, and that goes back to the very first Metal Gear game where the enemy is called Big Boss, right?
Yeah.
Which then you have to take seriously for the next 30 years of these games,
and you do,
and build into your canon. But it's hokey, but it sort of works.
It does.
The other silly anime thing in here, I mean, there's so many, but like the other one is like the liquid taking over Revolver Ocelot's body through his arm. Which if you don't know the games, I'm not even gonna bother explaining.
Don't even worry about it. You're probably not listening anymore if you don't know the games, and that's okay.
But the other one that I really love and appreciate, because it's just so fucking stupid, is the post-credits conspiratorial reveal of Metal Gear Solid 1 is that Revolver Ocelot was secretly working with the U.S. president, who is also a clone of Big Boss. Yes. And in this game, he's the main antagonist. So he's also a clone. He looks like an old version of Solid Snake. And at the very end fight of the game is you fight him, and he's got like a Dr. Octopus suit on top of a Metal Gear that's crashed into Wall Street. It's like right above like Federal Hall, which is pretty funny. And also kind of interesting too on the subversive level is that like when all of the conspiratorial like truth comes out about what the plot is, when you actually break it down, at least just within this game, not the stuff that gets retconned later, but like what happens in this game is ultimately like the bad guys who are being led by this terrorist outfit who is like the previous president of the United States, who's also a clone of Big Boss. They're like right. And all of the main characters like acknowledge that they're basically like their plan is correct because they're trying to subvert an AI takeover of the world that seeks to like control and manipulate everybody. And nonetheless, you have to kill him.
Yeah.
And again, speaking to one of, even though it's like done in a very silly and over the top and nonsensical way, the real main antagonist of all of these games is the U.S. government.
Oh yeah,
like or different factions within the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Even though you end up you're fighting like supposedly like terrorists, or later like different versions of like America's foreign enemies or whatever. Like ultimately, the bad guys, like the people who are shown to be morally incorrect and doing the evil things, are the U.S. government.
Yeah.
It is like the military-industrial complex, which is the real enemy, which is kind of interesting.
It's just like real life.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the meme stuff anymore, or should we move on?
Yeah, did you want to talk about that aspect of it more? I do think that there was some interesting commentary about that in one of the articles that I read, which was talking about how this game is so culturally situated in Japan, and how like back then 2-channel already existed in Japan, and like the way that information flow happened on the internet was evolving, and that stuff is heavily touched on in the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically a sort of just a long thesis statement that's in the final end dump of the game about how the internet is this like explosion of all kinds of information that's out there, and the AI's goal, the evil AI who's been like manipulating everything behind the scene. The reason why they want to like control everything is to to basically implement like censorship and change the flow of information. And there's a lot that's sort of like brought up and that would now be characterized in the discussions around like misinformation.
Sure, yeah.
Whatever, the sort of filter bubble kind of stuff, right? Like there's a couple of lines in there that speak to the danger of like people sort of siloing themselves off in areas of information where they only see the confirmation bias kind of stuff.
Right.
This is like this is often when people like kind of go back and talk about this game, this is the thing they point to as it being sort of poignant or ahead of its time, not understood it at the time, because again, it came out in 2001 when some of those ideas are at least relatively new on the internet, or in any kind of like representation or discussion of the internet. Prior to this, really, like you had like all those like action movies in the 90s that were just called like The Net, or like hackers and stuff, and the culmination of that was like then something like The Matrix, right? Which is the information control could be this like spooky simulated thing. In retrospect, in watching it now, it is like it does touch on all those things. I don't know if it actually says anything particularly interesting about those things, but it does bring them up, which is kind of curious. It does take the kind of vantage point of like a kind of vague, like, I don't know, humanist anti-censorship tact. Like if there's any politics really to it there, it's just sort of like maybe censorship and control is bad.
Sure,
which, like,
yeah.
Okay, sure.
Or is it good?
But it's certainly there. And it's that's the one where it's like that's in the context of contemporary culture, right? Like that's what makes it interesting, is an artifact that's now like over 20 years old.
Sure. And I mean, apart from like the parts where they're like directly talking about that, the game overall like plays with that concept of misinformation and truth in like, again, you're playing a character that's essentially just like being gaslit the entire game. Like there is no way to know what's real while you're playing the game. And that's something that you are supposed to think about as you're playing through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that also, I read an interesting piece about that because this game is so culturally situated in Japan, obviously. And that was in part meant to be a commentary on like otaku culture and being unable to differentiate between reality and the media you consume, which I think is also like really interesting. And that appealed to me again, because like I like grew up in like the American version of that culture or whatever. So I'm looking at it with the benefit of like having experienced that culture on this end. Whereas when the game came out, that wasn't like such a mainstream type of culture, which I think probably speaks to why a lot of people were like pissed off about that, because that was probably something that they didn't like really understand, like that the character of Raiden was supposed to represent that, and that a lot of the stuff happening in the game is supposed to touch on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly like I didn't get a lot of that when I first played.
You were
through
also
it,
like
you know,
11, so it's reasonable.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was definitely more like, you know, it grew on me with time as I played through it a couple of times. But it was definitely like a little disappointing, like, oh, I don't get to play as Snake, I don't get to be like this cool hero. This is making me think a little bit too hard about the thing I'm consuming. But you know, all of that changed in the next game.
Your favorite
Metal
one.
Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater.
Snake Eater.
Snake Eater.
Does the song actually say Snake Eater? I don't think it does.
Like 50 times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've sang like fake versions of the song so many times that I don't know what the song says anymore because I'm just going around the house just like saying like random words. Yeah. Someday you'll eat a hot dog. Like just all day. All fucking day.
So the next game comes out in 2004. And it's a prequel to all of the games. So, you know, Metal Gear Solid 2 ends on this like big cliffhanger of like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? Who are the Patriots? Who are these like secret evil people, this conspiratorial Illuminati group that's controlling everything behind the scenes? And the third game is just like, nope. And it goes all the way back to the 1960s.
Taking it way back.
You play as a character whose first is called Naked Snake. And it is, you know, it's the same Snake character. It's again played by the same voice actor, David Hayter. It's the same
we haven't mentioned, but
he's
so good.
Oh, he's so. I mean, the whole
amazing.
Cast is really great. And you know, like a lot of video games, both then and now, right? Like you can look at them, and the quality of writing is maybe not as great as, you know, most films and TV. Especially older ones are really hokey, but the big like cultural impact thing that this whole series had, especially in the first one moving on, is it really did pioneer this idea of like making games more cinematic, right? They're like,
sure, yeah.
You know, it created this thing of like, you know, you play the game for a little bit, then you watch like a cinematic sequence, and at least story-based games, you know, all kind of like take that element now, right? Wasn't the only game to do it, but it definitely was in that first crop of ones to do it. And Metal Gear Solid 3 is like the most directly like cinematic, and at least in terms of like the way that it communicates most of its information, and even all like the weird, you know, all the weird conspiracy insane plot shit is still there, but there's this whole other setting. And it took me a while when I was a kid and first playing through it to realize like, oh shit, you're playing not as Solid Snake, you're playing as Big Boss. You're playing about this guy they've been talking about the whole series, we've never really seen, and you're playing like his first mission. And so you have that kind of dangling over the whole narrative once that, you know, drops for you, and you're like, oh, okay, at some point this guy's going to become the villain, right?
Like, how does that happen?
That adds the sort of interesting anti-hero subversion element, right? Like I'm playing as a guy that's eventually going to be a bad guy. And it's set in the Cold War. And the big thing in this game is this idea of like intense like relativism, like a moral relativism between the United States and the Soviet Union. So you're like Naked Snake, you've got to infiltrate a jungle base in Russia, which makes no sense at all. But they just wanted it to be in a jungle, and they wanted it to be in the Soviet Union. So they just made up an area. And you know, you've got to infiltrate this base. You've got to uncover this stuff about a secret weapons project. You have your mentor character, the boss, who betrays you, and you know, eventually you have to fight her. But the relativism thing is interesting because the big thematic throughout is like, you know, the Soviet Union and the United States are basically equal, right? Which is, at least again at that time, 2004, right? Like in terms of like a mainstream video game product or even just entertainment, cultural product, right? Like it does not try to do the thing of like, these are the bad guys, these are evil. There are some villainous characters, but most of like the Soviet characters are far more ambiguous, or even relatable, you know, or like portrayed very positively. And ultimately at the end of the game, the true villain is like the CIA or whatever, right? Like, so that's again sort of an interesting thing. this is the game, like, I could do just 5 hours just gushing about this game, so I'll kind of try to limit myself a little bit. What did you think playing through this one?
I was really shocked that I tried to play it by skipping the cutscenes before, and I understand why that was so surprising to you, and why the guy that I knew who wanted me to play it so bad was like very pissed off that I did that.
Yeah.
Because there is just like so much there, and I really thought, and this might sound corny, but I thought that there were like a lot of aspects of the game that were feminist, which was really interesting. Like I really enjoyed the relationship between Snake and his mentor slash former lover slash almost mother figure, which was kind of weird. But
Mother lover figure.
Yeah, which is it was really interesting because you take this character that's like a tough guy who's like modeled after this like 80s action guy, and he's so vulnerable like throughout the game. There's so many moments where you're just like, this must be like awful for him, just like personally, and it's very cool.
I do think that there's something interesting with the sexual politics of the game, and of course we're speaking here on a very like there's like a very generous grading curve because we're talking about it in the context of video games, right?
Yeah.
And like even within the series too, and if we ever do a follow-up episode to this, unless people like revolt and
everybody
like,
gets mad and unsubscribes.
Stop talking about this. But if we ever talk about the later games, there's like much more problematic characterizations of female characters. But in this one, it is pretty interesting that you have like, the sort of main antagonist to the game is again, you're this essentially mother mentor figure, who is like a total badass. And the whole plot twist of the game too is like she's the coolest. Like she's much better than like any other character. And that's like where the sort of tragic component of it comes into, because you're sort of forced to fight your mentor.
But it's all like orchestrated by her in a way too, which is like really interesting.
Yes.
And she's ultimately the hero as well, right? In a way.
Yeah, she's the real hero of the game.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. And she has a lot of lines too, which speak to very directly to that kind of relativist thing where it's like, who your enemy is today might change. Friends and foes like shift with the times according to politics. There is no such thing as an absolute eternal enemy, which again, very clunkily and ham-fisted. Like that's just like verbatim what's written into the text, but it is still nonetheless, I think, a pretty thought-provoking thing to put as central to the video game, right? Like that's like the entire plot is like hinges upon this idea of that the things you're fighting for are politically determined and
out of your control.
And ultimately out of your control, which is pretty interesting. Just in the like vibe or like mise en scène of the game too. This one is also like the other two take a very like the films that they're pulling from, right? Because we were talking about them being sort of cribbed from a bunch of different cinematic tropes, right? Like they're taking from that kind of like 80s, 90s like dark, gritty action movie conspiracy thriller type things. They all take place in these like very like industrial environments. This one is like very much pulled from like 60s Bond schlock.
Yeah.
And so on like a camp level, it's so fucking entertaining to play.
It really
because
is.
There's like the music is just like 60s, go-go Bond themes and shit. All of the bad guys are just like batshit insane. There's like the guy who he's just filled with bees.
There's the Sorrow is probably like one of my favorite.
The Sorrow. I mean, this is an interesting one too, speaking to the anti-war stuff in the games, because so in a lot of the games, right, there are these like heavily spoken about anti-war themes, but an undercurrent to them, and this is kind of brings up the question again of like the effectiveness of the message, right? Because you can always you can make anything, right? You can make like just like a war movie that is pretty much a straightforward glorification of war movie, and you throw in a couple of lines about like war is terrible or whatever,
right?
And then the question is like, well, was that really the message of it? When in actuality we were watching and being like excited by this war sequence. So you can make the similar claim about video games, but what's interesting in this series, and particularly in the third one, is that there is a gameplay mechanic where it essentially rewards you for non-violent solutions to the game. And it's written most literally in this third one, where one of the boss fights you fight is like an undead ghost guy. And all you have to do to beat him is go down a really long river. That's it, like a sort of river Styx, walking towards death kind of sequence.
And it can be empty if you didn't kill anyone.
It can be totally empty.
In the game.
Or if you have killed people, all of the ghosts of the soldiers and guards and stuff that you've killed will come at you and attack you. So the difficulty of this boss fight directly corresponds to like how violently you've played the game. And it's legitimately like, when I was a kid, at least, it was definitely really spooky. And I think it was still pretty spooky playing it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I mean, it goes on for quite long. So it does like give you a lot of time to think about the meaning of the thing, like as it's happening, as you're just like kind of trying to like slog through this river of all the guys that you like shot in the dick throughout the game.
Yeah.
And it makes you question like, oh, did I really think that was like so funny to do?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, because this one being, coming out when it did, it had like, I don't know what it's called in game design or whatever, but it had like, when you would shoot soldiers in this one, the shots were like localized to their body parts.
Yeah, the physics of it are a lot more advanced. Yeah.
So if you shot a guy in the dick, like
then you have a dickless ghost coming after you.
Yeah, like coming at you, and he's like holding his like crotch and like crying, and he's saying like, "Why did you do this to me?" Which is both like really funny and weird.
It's really fucked up if you think about it. Like,
but again, it forces you to confront. Like we were saying in the first game at the end when the bad guy is just like, oh, you like the killing, right? This one more directly makes you kind of play through and think about that.
Right, and it also, like, makes you think, like, a lot of the times when you're, like, playing these games, like, you are just kind of, like, mindlessly killing people or whatever, but it does speak to, like, the human toll of, like, what a soldier carries or whatever, which you can debate whether or not it's, like, corny or whether it's, like, effective, but it is, like, interesting, and most games, especially back then, more games do it now. More games have, like, ethically ambiguous kind of stuff, but, like, back then, I don't think it was as common to have to, like, confront, like, oh, yeah, you're literally just killing hundreds of people. And that does, if you're a real person doing it, stay with you and change you forever.
Absolutely. And there is some stuff here in all the series. It's more like directly and literally engaged with in later installments in the series. But there's stuff about sort of like PTSD and carrying around those pains and those memories and stuff.
Definitely, even in Peace Walker, you see that we're playing.
Oh, absolutely,
now.
Yeah.
Which again, unless everybody unsubscribes, maybe we can talk about that another time.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think there's I fucking love this game so much, and even just on the level of its campiness and the music, and we're definitely gonna end this episode with the Snake Eater song because it's so fucking funny and silly. It really does do that. Makes you confront your choices, and it makes you think about things outside of the game narrative in a clever way, because it's also probably out of these three the one that least is kind of like obsessed with reminding you that like, oh, this is a video game.
For sure.
Like, I don't think there's not really a moment in this game where characters like say that to you, or you have to like fiddle with hardware or whatever.
If there is a moment like that, it's so minor compared to like all the other aspects of the game that I don't even like remember it, but it feels much more like a movie and like an experience. And it is, if Metal Gear Solid 2 is like anti-immersive, this game is a lot like more immersive and like emotional, and you feel a lot more like invested in the sense of like you are the character as you're playing through, for sure.
Which is then what, the game ends in tragedy. And it is a real like intense emotional gut punch at the end when you realize that like, the same sort of realization, oh, you were betrayed by your superiors, you were lied to, and ultimately this mentor figure who you thought was evil turned out to be like morally correct and doing the right thing. And that's also then, it both serves as the narrative like connecting point of like, you see like, oh, okay, this is the thing that broke this character I was playing as, and is what is going to turn him into a villain. Like there's that point made, but also it makes you reflect on like the nature of the Cold War conflict specifically. And again, it's like, it's very clear, like, the bad guys in this movie, it's like literally the CIA director. It's like the bad guy. He's really like the villain, which,
Yeah.
you know, nowadays, sure, there's a lot more types of media and stuff, you know, that I'm privy to or whatever. But again, as a young kid, definitely hit me pretty strong, right? Like to encounter that, because these games also sort of speaking to that thing I was talking about at the beginning, the military entertainment complex, like at least these first 3 games came out in like, or the second one and the third one really came out in like the fucking midst of the war on terror, like the hysteria of the war. And like, I know in Metal Gear Solid 2, they had to cut a whole end sequence from the game because it was like coming out right after 9/11. And it's like set in New York City, so they're like, we can't show buildings exploding in New York City.
Yeah, of course.
But it's still about like, you're fighting terrorists in New York, and then it turns out the terrorists are right. And in the third one, it's like, you know, you're fighting on behalf of the United States to like, you know, fix this problem to prevent all-out nuclear war. But then it turns out actually it's the United States that kind of started the whole fucking problem.
Right.
And like, you know, the CIA is really the bad guy here. Not the Soviets or whatever, which is an interesting subversion, I think. I mean, also to, you know, to the environment and the time that it's set in, and you can see, I think this was the game in particular, as we were playing through it, like, as we went through different sections of this story, you like turned to me and you're like, oh, I get it. Like, I get why you love these games, because there's a lot. It's similarly to how we were describing, like, in previous games, there's like a lot of like sort of found footage, documentary stuff put in here. They do the same thing here, but with all like early nuclear weapons development, and they talk about like the logic of deterrence, the flawed logic of deterrence, the whole like thing that the weapon you're trying to fight at the end is again a nuclear weapon, but it's in the context of the Cold War, and so it's the idea of like, this is the weapon that could like lead to nuclear apocalypse. And it talks about like, you know, the futility and folly of mutually assured destruction. And there's the character Sokolov, who's the Soviet scientist who's sort of taking on the role of Otacon from the first game, but he has the same long kind of monologue-y stuff about like, you know, he wanted to build space rockets, and he ended up having to build nuclear rockets, and he wanted to just do good things with his knowledge, and he's been forced to create these terrifying weapons, which, again, similar to in the previous game, where it's like, I know what they're going for. I think me and you are both looking at each other and just like, fuck this guy. Like,
I mean, I think it's an accurate representation of like how people in these positions feel in real life, which like we have opinions about, but that is just like how they are.
It's the self-justification.
Yeah,
it's the self-justification of why I worked on these like horrible weapons things.
Right.
But it is, even though it ultimately is about creating these like ridiculous kind of mechs, you know, these like impossible mechs that are ripped out of like Gundam or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's still playing on that idea of like the ways in which science and technology have been geared towards military weapons research, and in this game too, there's another kind of recurring thing is like talking about the space race, and the space race ultimately, no matter what's said about the sort of nobility of humanity going to the stars, the space race ultimately is just a weapons program, right? Like that's what it was designed to be about. That's why the two superpowers were in competition to do it. And I think that's particularly interesting. And something that to this day, now when we have a sort of resuscitated idea of like privatized space exploration is sort of lost, which is like, you know, the fucking rockets that they used were built and designed off the same kind of foundation that like nuclear weapons rocketry was, you know, and just rockets as weapons in general were built as, and a lot of the desires and goals of getting to space was like, can we put like a fucking H-bomb in the upper atmosphere that can like target people or whatever?
And then Elon Musk used it to send a Tesla into orbit. What a fucking world, dude.
Did you see that headline the other day that was like, economists say we should privatize the moon?
What?
That's pretty good. All right, we can talk about it later.
What the fuck?
I'll show it to you.
What a fucking nightmare.
Yeah. So there's like a million things more I could say about this game, but we should probably wrap up here.
Yeah, I guess we've been talking a while, huh?
And I did want to talk about like the fact that Metal Gear Solid 3 has now been turned into like pachinko slot machines by Konami. But maybe we'll if we end up doing a follow-up to this when we talk about the later games, so we can maybe also get into the sort of politics of like an entertainment corporation like Konami.
Yeah,
which,
and there was
you know,
like conflict between Konami and Kojima, right?
Right,
Yeah.
and then he sort of got kicked out, or you know, he left in the midst or at the end of creating the fifth game.
Yeah, and then the creative
and,
choices that also happen that kind of take away from the game, like getting rid of David Hayter, who's just fucking
Right,
amazing. Like,
yeah, it's We
Yeah.
again, if you end up actually wanting to play through all those games, with
I
me
will.
too, 'cause
I'm
that's
committed.
That's the other thing too, is that, you know, even in going back and thinking like, oh, it'd be fun to play through all these games, one just on a time level, right? Like,
it's a big commitment.
but even though that these are older games, right? Each one of them maybe took us 10 to 15 hours to complete.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Whereas now video games, like if you want to sit down and replay through like a video game, it's like 50 hours. Like
That's
I think
true, that's true.
Fucking Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, just to get the main story stuff is like 60, 70 hours. Not to
Yeah.
mention like all the other shit in it. So I don't know if we'll end up doing that, but
We're gonna do it. Don't worry.
I don't know why I'm pretending like I'm not gonna make you do that. Like, obviously we're gonna do
It's
it.
so obvious.
I guess it's an open question if anybody here gives a shit to listen to
Yeah.
us gotta talk about it. But sort of wrapping up, I think you know, having gone through those games, and one of the reasons why I even thought it would be of interest beyond just like gushing about them, to talk about them on the show, is to kind of get back to this idea of like the political stuff that's in there and whether or not ultimately like you thought those things were effective or interesting kind of means of persuasion. Do they work? Do they not work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting when I was just kind of like searching for stuff to read about the game as we were preparing for this was I came across a lot of conversations on Reddit as well as like other video game forums where people were asking, do you think this game is political or this game series is political? Which like just asking that question in and of itself is just like, yeah, like duh. Like of course it's political. Like are you kidding?
Yeah, it's like is the war political?
Right.
Don't politicize the war. Yeah,
But
it's
like
that
what
idea.
was really interesting to me is like a lot of like fans are like, oh yeah, it's political, but it's not partisan, you know, or it's like it's philosophical, it's not political. And it's like it really does show that your own experience and like what you bring into it can affect how you take it. Because like to me it's fucking crazy to be like it's not partisan or whatever. Like even looking at stuff through that lens, it's like you're looking for it to like offend you, I guess, or something. I don't know. But it does kind of like go back to what I was saying, that the only other person I've known who was like super into it to the level you are was just like a maniac who like wanted to like join the Marines, like kind of reactionary guy.
Right.
And for him, like it didn't conflict with his politics at all. So I can't ask him because I don't know
Right.
him anymore, but I assume he either thought it was like apolitical or maybe even like in support of like how cool it would be to be like a genome soldier fighting your own
Right,
clone or
right.
whatever, which is
Yeah.
I guess it is cool in a way, but it's also like a nightmare.
I mean, I think when you told me that initially, it was stunning at first because obviously I played these games, like I said, as a kid, and they're
Right.
not like overtly left wing in a sort of you know, in an explicit sense, but they're
No.
very obviously anti-war and
Yes.
and anti-nuclear, and those two things, you know, were I guess places I was coming to anyway.
Yeah.
Through other stuff, but they really resonated with me, and they made me think a lot about it.
Yeah.
But I do think the fact that like somebody can play through that game and sort of not kind of get that message or not
Yeah.
agree with it sort of speaks to the ambiguity of like the anti-war narrative in
Sure.
in entertainment media in general. And this is something that I think a lot about, not just in terms of like video games, but also in movies or in shows or in books and stuff. Because, you know, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of material, entertainment material made about warfare.
Yeah.
Most of it is pretty glowing, right? And that's what
Yeah.
we were talking about at the beginning with the military entertainment complex. Like most of it is about justifying and glorifying warfare.
Yeah.
And glorifying soldiery and being like, this is a heroic and noble thing to do. And certainly when I was growing up, I mean, if you think about in Hollywood, right, there was like the revival of the World War II stuff that really started with like Saving Private Ryan, which, and that's an interesting one because we've talked about it, where it's like, that is a film where, the opening sequence where it's like you have the D-Day landings, it's like supposed to be like, oh, look at how horrific this is. And ultimately, it's about like, we got to get this guy out of this like horrible conflict. And so there's a way you could look at that and characterize it as anti-war. And I've seen people do it. But like watching it, like the actual narrative ideological thing that's being communicated is like, this is a noble sacrifice.
For sure.
Which really isn't an anti-war message. If you're still finding redemption and meaning in the conflict, then you're not actually saying that the conflict is bad or morally ambiguous. You're saying the conflict is good, it's just like the individual experience of being a soldier in it is difficult. And a lot of stuff, especially American military films that are like often characterized as anti-war really are much more like that, where it's just about like how traumatic it is for the soldiers, but ultimately it's a noble sacrifice.
And I do think I noticed this and was surprised by it, especially towards the end of Metal Gear Solid 3, that there is a little bit of that like ambiguity, right? There is a lot of talk about like this sort of like patriotism and this sort of like pride in being a soldier. And even though there is so much emphasis on like that personal sacrifice, like the human sacrifice that happens in war, there also is like this implication of like it's necessary, like our jobs are important, like we're called to do this, and it is like particularly noble to be in this position, which to me is it's in conflict with like what I view as the central message of the series, right? So I could definitely see how you could try to take it that way. I think even with that ambiguity, it is like difficult to miss the anti-war message, but there's always going to be a guy who like watches RoboCop and wants to become a cop and like misses the point,
misses the satire.
And that doesn't mean that it doesn't work as satire. Like, of course it works. It's obvious what the message is,
I mean, I think in terms of just like what a purely good anti-war kind of war narrative story, like a model for where it actually like works is recently we also watched the 1979
oh my goodness
TV film version of All Quiet on the Western Front with Ernest Borgnine. And I've read the novel like a ton of times. I've seen the original film, but I'd never seen this one. And you'd never read the book or anything.
We read like parts of it together, I think. And
But yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with that, I mean, it's one of the greatest stories. I really think that ought to be like mandatory reading for like middle school age or whatever or something.
Our kids are going to be so fucked
up.
Oh,
absolutely. I don't give a shit. They got to know from the get-go that the trenches are no game. But because what's successful about that narrative is that there is no redemption at the end of it.
Everybody
it's
fucking
just
dies.
Pointless.
Yeah.
Everybody dies pointlessly.
It's
and
totally
that is
senseless.
That's the best way you can kind of communicate in a narrative story, I think, like the futility and moral tragedy of war without giving any opportunity to like there being a redeeming factor. Like at the end of the day, I came out of it. And even, even in that book, like it speaks to like the camaraderie of soldiery, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I guess you could read it in a romanticizing way, although I think if you did, you'd be really fucked up.
You'd be a sicko,
but
you're fucking
because that's
crazy.
Because ultimately the point is that doesn't save them. That's the point is that even that like kind of intense bond that they gain through combat offers no redemption.
Right,
ultimately.
even the part in that book where he's like trying to like save the person who has become like kind of his mentor or whatever, and then by the time he gets him into the hospital, he's just dead. Like that's it. There was no point. There was no point in that like sacrifice and camaraderie that he made or whatever. Because it's just like no matter what you do, you're all just like gonna die. Best case.
And they also and critically, and I think this is something that is understandably might be hard to do in the context of like a video game or even in most films or whatever. But like the thing that happens in that story is that whenever nobody dies in any important way.
Yes.
Everybody dies incidentally in the chaos of battle. Like nobody dies. Nobody's death is like
it's not glorious.
reconfigured as like he died so that we could accomplish XYZ. Everybody like either just gets like hit by a shell or just gets shot in the stomach and bleeds out like in a pointless exchange, which is
it's also really depressing. So I could see why they wouldn't
that's the
do
thing.
that in a video game.
And that's that would be a much harder sell. And that probably is the kind of thing that you might find in indie games, but might be harder to put into a big AAA action game.
Yeah, those like notes of redemption and overall meaning are kind of like necessary to turn this into a series, right? Because otherwise, like when we finished watching the movie All Quiet on the Western Front, like I think it was like 3 a.m. and I just like got up and walked away from the room and I was like, I'm gonna smoke a cigarette, which I rarely do anymore. I'll smoke a cigarette like every few months. I was just like, I'm gonna go outside. It's like 8 degrees, but I don't care. Yeah, it is. It's just a lot. And I think that's the other thing, right? Like these games, even though they have this like really heavy and important message, like they are still really fun and they still have a lot of like really like silly and campy moments. And it does make you want to keep playing and see what's going on. And even if it's like confusing sometimes, that's just like more motivation to figure out what the fuck is going on, right? Like I rarely play a video game and then read like books or journal articles about it. But with this I did. So
it's certainly thought-provoking. And I think the last thing I wanted to bring up in terms of the politics of it is because in looking through and trying to find like what other people had maybe read or said about the series that might be interesting to bring up, I stumbled upon an article on the Conservapedia. Which is the conservative Wikipedia on the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and they think that Metal Gear Solid is very political. It's very left wing, and it's pushing all kinds of nasty ideas. So I want to read just a few little snippets from it here. So it gives some like overview to the whole thing. There's like a big section on it talking about like the depiction of terrorism in Metal Gear Solid and how it's like too ambiguous. But this part I thought was really funny. There's a little subset here called cloning, stem cells, and abortion.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I'll read here, quote, the character Solid Snake, Liquid Snake, and Solidus are all clones of the super soldier Big Boss. In the method described in the game, in vitro fertilization is used with 8 embryos, and 5 of them, originally stated as 6 of them before the plot twist regarding Solidus was revealed, are aborted to give rise to the clones. The main villain, one of the clones, explicitly refers to this action as murder, although he attributes this action to themselves rather than the ones actually doing the abortion. So they're mad that in this fantasy universe where they made like 8 clones of Big Boss, that some of them were aborted.
Imagine you're like playing the game and like that's what you're upset about.
Yeah. Another thing here, Big Boss, after having been mortally wounded, supposedly survives by being cryogenically frozen, then stem cells heal him. So they're mad at the idea that stem cells are used as a plot point.
Yeah, I mean, like to conservatives, especially religious conservatives, like stem cell research or treatments of any kind is one of the absolute worst things you can do. I don't know if I've mentioned on the show before, when I was in high school, I had a teacher compare me to Hitler for saying I didn't think stem cell research was wrong. And I was like, okay, I'm 14, by the way. Yeah. But yeah, I
mean, that should be said too. When in the first game, that is the one that most heavily deals with the gene stuff. That when that came out in the late 90s, that was like at the heyday of like the sort of culture war fervor over both abortion, but also like stem cells and just like genetic stuff in general.
Yeah, I think it was probably like right after like Dolly the sheep was cloned is probably when the first game came out. So that stuff was just kind of entering the mainstream consciousness.
And there was like a legitimate sort of ethical question about what does it say about XYZ, but the conservative version of it to fixate on these different things is funny.
Yeah, it is.
Certainly. Another little last bit I want to read from here. There's another little subset called left-wing politics / 1960s culture. And I just want to read here. In the game Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, there are several amounts of bias towards the Marxist revolutionary / terrorist Che Guevara, with several characters looking up to him and little, if any, actual critiques offered towards him.
It's so fucked up that they won't critique him.
And further down, in addition, the games, at least since Metal Gear Solid 2, have also pushed nihilism and moral relativism in an implied positive light. It is also strongly suggested that Metal Gear Solid 2 tried to push a postmodernist agenda. And then there's one more line here. The grand game plan for Metal Gear Solid 2 also hints at pushing a feminist outlook.
For Metal Gear Solid 2?
I don't even know what they could possibly be talking about. There's like 2 female characters.
Yeah.
I guess 3 female characters in Metal Gear Solid 2, and I wouldn't characterize any of their plots as particularly feminist.
Yeah, like we didn't get to mention this, but like one of my favorite things is like how useless Otacon's sister is in Metal Gear Solid 2. She's just like I guess she like did develop the AI or whatever at the core of the game, but like she's also just supposed to be like kind of like a dumb, useless loser who just like can't function. And then like one of the other women mentioned is like her mom, which had an affair with her own stepson. I don't really understand what about this game can be perceived as feminist. Maybe I need to send these guys an email and ask them.
So again, it just shows that like even in something that, you know, we could say like, oh, it's thought-provoking, I don't know exactly where we land on the politics of it, but, you know, it brings up some interesting ideas. You know, like there's always going to be some fucking subset of reactionaries who look at it and be like, this is the feminist
so
dragon dismantling Western like culture and whatever.
Oh my god, that's really funny. I want to like look up and see if there's like conservative like video game review sites that talk about this, because I'm sure there are. Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure we could, if we went on like the hellscape that is like reactionary gaming YouTube, we could find.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to do that as soon as we stop recording.
About how like Metal Gear Solid 5 is like a Marxist plot to make you think that like the war in Afghanistan isn't good.
I'm sure that like a lot of like reactionary guys are very upset by like the ending of Metal Gear Solid 3 as well, which we didn't really touch on, but it is just like, in addition to like the vulnerability that Snake has to deal with his mentor, there's like a woman eventually. The ultimate thing is like betrays him and abandons him.
Yeah, there's the Ava character, right?
Yeah, which is
like,
great.
Sort of Snake's love interest, but it turns out she's actually just manipulating her sexuality to like sort of trick him in her own espionage thing, which is it's cleverly done.
Cool.
It's a really great ending. But I'm sure there's some like incel take on that where it's like, you know, all women
Snake
want
would never do this.
All women want to do is steal the microfilm, revealing where the philosopher's legacy is stored for China.
Yeah.
All right. Well, damn, this is almost 2 hours
Oh,
long.
well.
I thought this would be a quick one.
Oops.
Okay, well, you know, if
I hope
if
you
like
enjoyed
this, yeah.
If you haven't
let us
played the
know.
games and you listened the whole way, thank you so much. And you should play them too. They are really good. I don't play video games as much anymore as I did when I was younger. Like I said, I mostly play like the Beaver game we've talked about or stuff like The Sims or whatever, but I did genuinely enjoy playing through these. So I think even if you're not like a very avid gamer, that this is something that can be enjoyable.
On easy mode. Play them on easy mode.
On easy mode. Oh my god. On easy mode. Please.
Yeah.
All right.
Stay cool, snakes.
Snake! Okay, that's it.
Snake!
I'll end on that.
Snake, man. All right,
We didn't even make one Raymond Hoser reference this whole time.
We did at the very beginning with the intro. I
Oh,
think
that's true.
fine.
All right,
That's
I
fine.
hope that was enough. All right, stay cool.
See you later, alligator.
I give my life, not for honor, but for you. In my time, there'll be no one else. Crime, it's the way I fly to you.
on a tree frog. It's ordeal, the trial to survive for the day we see new light. I give my life, not for honor, but for you.
More of like a
Okay. He's in my mind. Ah!
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Is that all the lines
yeah,
from
yeah,
Arrow?
Yeah.
Wow.
I wrote her out. Yeah. I know.
Refrigerator girlfriend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what happens in the story. That's what happens in the fucking game, okay? So, I don't know. Blame me for that, you know. Maybe you should speak to fucking Hideo Kojima, alright?